Weapons locked. Fire on my command." The admiral's voice cut through the comms. 3 destroyers moved to sink a lone civilian vessel. She didn't flee, didn't flinch. She just lifted a black phone and made one call. 60 seconds later, every screen aboard the USS Leighton went dark. A no-fly order grounded their air wing. And the admiral's career? Over, because the woman they tried to erase was the architect of their entire defense protocol. Who gave her clearance that high? And why did a man in a Pentagon war room call her Nemesis? This is Veteranbiker. Comment 1 if you're new, 2 if you've been with us, 3 if you ride with us every week. Like, subscribe, and stay to the end. The endless blue of the Gulf of Sulu shimmered under the weight of the new day's sun, a vast, unbroken expanse that promised nothing but quiet and routine. For Commander Ellis Kearns at the helm of the USS Leighton, a vessel bristling with the latest in naval technology, this calm was the very definition of a good morning. The Leighton was a ghost in these waters, a silent testament to American power and precision, its purpose to monitor, to observe, to project a presence that went unseen. Kearns, a man whose face was etched with the quiet confidence of a decade at sea, scanned the horizon with a pair of ancient-looking binoculars, a habit he'd never broken despite the advanced optics available to him on the bridge. He was a commander who trusted his instincts as much as his instruments, a man who saw the ocean as an intricate puzzle, not a simple map. His executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Rourke Dent, was the opposite. Dent was the human embodiment of the Leighton's rigid protocols, a man whose ambition was as clean and polished as his immaculate uniform. He trusted the screens, the algorithms, and the cold logic of the rulebook above all else. His posture was always rigid, his gaze fixed on the data streams that scrolled across the holographic displays of the bridge, seeing the world not as a fluid puzzle, but as a series of binary decisions. The first blip on that perfect morning came not as a threat, but as a question. The navigational radar chimed softly, indicating a single, unclassified vessel approximately 5 nautical miles ahead, slowly approaching a designated restricted zone. Dent's eyes narrowed. "Civilian vessel, Captain. Heading 140. Incursion trajectory confirmed." His voice was clipped, devoid of any emotional inflection. To him, this wasn't a boat. It was an object on a screen, a variable in an equation that demanded a single predefined solution. Kearns lowered his binoculars, his expression thoughtful. "Any identification? Registry?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. Dent tapped a command on his console. "Negative. Standard recreational craft profile. Single occupant detected via thermal and high-resolution imaging. No transponder signal. Appears to be a solo sailor, sir." The words hung in the air, a picture painted by technology. A lone figure on a small boat, moving with a leisurely pace, a speck of civilian life against the backdrop of a military machine. The image seemed almost quaint, an anachronism in this theater of power. The boat itself, christened the Silent Arrow, was a picture of deceptive simplicity. Its white hull was sleek and well-maintained, suggesting a comfortable if not extravagant lifestyle. A lone figure, a woman, moved with the unhurried grace of someone completely at home on the water. Her movements were economical, her attention split between the gentle rhythm of the waves and a modest navigation console. From a distance, she was unremarkable. She could have been a tourist, an adventurer, a retiree fulfilling a lifelong dream. But up close, the details would have told a different story. The boat's subtle lines were reinforced, its antenna arrays disguised as standard fittings, and the small, quiet hum that emanated from its depths was the sound of a system far beyond any civilian design. Marina Vale, the woman at its helm, was the master of this quiet deception. She wasn't leisurely drifting, she was drifting with purpose. Every slight adjustment to her course, every glance at her instruments, was a calculated move in a game of high-stakes chess. She knew the USS Leighton was out there, had been expecting it for the better part of an hour. The cat-and-mouse game was part of the plan, a dance of protocol and patience. Back on the bridge of the USS Leighton, the dance was becoming a source of friction. "Initiate standard warning protocol, Lieutenant Commander," Kearns ordered, his voice steady. Dense fingers flew across his console. A clear, synthesized voice cut through the calm morning, broadcast on all common maritime frequencies. "Civilian vessel on bearing 140. This is the USS Leighton. You are approaching a restricted maritime zone. Alter your course immediately. Over." On their high-resolution screens, they watched as the woman, Marina, gave a simple, polite wave in their direction, but her course remained unchanged. The polite gesture, a flicker of humanity, did nothing to alter the cold data on Dent's screen. "She's acknowledging, but not complying, sir," Dent noted, a hint of something that sounded like satisfaction creeping into his tone. To him, the gesture was not one of defiance, but of insolence. It was a clear violation of protocol, a problem that now demanded a more rigid solution. Kearns felt a different kind of unease. There was something about the woman's calm demeanor, her lack of concern, that didn't fit the profile of a typical activist or a lost tourist. Her movements were too deliberate, her vessel too well maintained. It was a mismatch, a discordant note in the symphony of data and commands. "Another warning, Lieutenant Commander. Use a different frequency. Be more direct." Dent complied, his posture growing more rigid with each passing minute. The second warning was sharper, more forceful. "Civilian vessel, this is your second and final warning. You are entering a restricted zone. Change course now, or we will be forced to take action." Again they watched as Marina's boat maintained its heading. Through the magnified image they could see her check a reading on an instrument panel, then make a minor adjustment to her course. The adjustment was noticeable, but not enough to take her away from the boundary. It was a move designed not to comply, but to taunt. The tension on the bridge began to thicken, a palpable weight in the air. Dent, his voice laced with the self-righteousness of a man whose every belief was being challenged, turned to Kearns. "Sir, regulations are clear. Unauthorized vessels in these waters, especially with increased regional activity, are a clear threat. She could be gathering intelligence. She's toying with us." Kearns stared at the screen, at the tranquil image of a woman and her boat. He felt the weight of his command, the responsibility to act, but his instincts, the part of him that saw the world as a puzzle, screamed caution. "Final warning," he said, his voice now steel. He would make the call himself. "Civilian vessel, this is the USS Leighton. This is your final warning. Failure to alter course will result in a warning shot being fired across your bow." As the message was sent, a young ensign, a junior communications officer named Miller, stood frozen at his station. His eyes were wide, fixed on a specific data stream coming from Marina's vessel. A series of pulses, a digital handshake, a flicker of light that lasted less than a second, but to him felt like an eternity. He had seen it before, in a classified briefing, a top-secret training module that had been redacted from the final curriculum. It was a recognition code, a silent identifier for something not meant to be seen, a phantom protocol. His heart began to pound against his ribs. He knew what it meant. He had seen the consequences of misidentifying a vessel with this code. He tried to speak, to call out, to tell his superiors what he had seen. The words got stuck in his throat, a knot of fear and disbelief. The command was already in motion. Dent, unable to hide his satisfaction, had relayed the orders to the weapons station. Prepare to fire a warning shot. Aim well clear of the vessel. Standard distance protocol. The order was an act of pure, unadulterated protocol. It was the correct decision, the only decision according to the rulebook. The shot was meant to be a show of force, a splash of water that would send a clear, unambiguous message. But in that moment, as the order was given, a different impulse, a darker one, took hold. Dent, seeing his chance to assert dominance, to prove the correctness of his rigid worldview, spoke into the comms channel to the weapons officer, his voice barely a whisper, a subtle adjustment to the order. Aim just a hair closer to the waterline. Make sure she gets the message. It was a violation of protocol, a small but catastrophic alteration. It was an act of arrogance, a deliberate push for escalation that went against every one of Kearns's instincts. The warning shot cracked across the water, a percussive slap that shattered the morning's serenity. But instead of splashing harmlessly beside the silent arrow, it clipped the hull just above the waterline. The impact was a sickening crunch, a sound that seemed to carry across the water and into the very souls of the men on the Leighton's bridge. A gasp went through the crew. The perfect, calm morning had been irrevocably broken. On the screens, they watched in horror as a small breach appeared in the hull of Marina's vessel. Water immediately began to seep in. Kearns's face, a mask of controlled fury and disbelief, went white. He spun on Dent, his voice a low growl that was more terrifying than any shout. "What the hell happened?" he demanded. Dent's posture, for the first time that morning, faltered. The cold satisfaction that had been on his face was replaced with a flicker of something close to panic. "Sir, sea conditions. They must have affected the trajectory," he stammered, his words lacking their usual pristine authority. The targeting was correct, it was an accident, but the words were hollow, even to his own ears. He knew what he had done. He had given the order, the small, subtle alteration that had turned a warning into an act of aggression. Kearns didn't even bother to respond. He grabbed the radio, his hands trembling with a mixture of rage and dread. "Civilian vessel, this is the USS Leighton. Do you require assistance? We are preparing rescue operations." He looked through his binoculars, his gaze fixed on Marina's boat. He expected panic, a distress call, a frantic wave for help. He expected to see the frantic movements of a woman whose life was now in danger. But what he saw sent a chill down his spine. Marina Vale did not panic. She did not wave. She did not even look at the growing pool of water around the breach in her hull. Her movements were, if anything, more deliberate, more precise. She simply walked into her cabin, her back to them, her focus entirely on her next move. The silent efficiency of her actions, the utter lack of concern, was more terrifying than any scream of panic could ever have been. Something was profoundly, fundamentally wrong with this picture. On the bridge of the Leighton, Ensign Miller, who had been frozen in terror, now found his voice, a strangled whisper that cut through the horrified silence of the crew. "Sir, the code. I saw it." Kearns, still holding the binoculars, didn't turn. "What code, Miller?" he asked, his voice strained. "A redacted protocol, sir. From the Phantom training module, a recognition code. We're not supposed to engage with vessels that transmit it." The words, finally spoken, hung in the air like a death sentence, but it was too late. The shot had been fired. The damage had been done. In the cabin of the Silent Arrow, Marina Vale retrieved a small, sleek black device, a satellite phone unlike any standard model, and with the same unnerving calm, she spoke just 6 words into it. The words were a quiet, precise command, an activation key in a system no one on the Leighton's bridge was cleared to know existed. And as the silent communication was sent, the crew of the Leighton, the officers who had fired a shot that was meant to be a simple warning, could only watch in dawning horror as their multi-billion-dollar warship suddenly went silent. The screens flickered. The encrypted systems went offline. All command protocols began to fail simultaneously, and in that moment, the true weight of their mistake began to settle in. The chaos on the bridge of the USS Leighton was not a symphony of screaming alarms or flashing red lights. It was a vacuum, a sudden, terrifying void of sound and function. The holographic screens that had moments before displayed crisp tactical data and navigational vectors now flickered with a green-tinged static before going dark. The comforting low hum of the ship's complex systems died, replaced by an unsettling, profound silence. The officers and crew, their hands still hovering over silent consoles, exchanged bewildered glances. This wasn't a power failure. The emergency lights were still on. It wasn't a standard malfunction. Every system, every single one, had failed simultaneously. Commander Ellis Kearns, his face still pale from the shock of the warning shot, felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. His gaze shot from one dark screen to the next, his mind racing to find a protocol, an explanation, anything that could make sense of this impossible situation. Lieutenant Commander Rourke Dent, the man whose arrogant whisper had set this disaster in motion, stood frozen, his immaculate posture finally broken. The smug satisfaction that had briefly graced his features was gone, replaced by a dawning, bone-deep terror. Then, from the bridge's main communication speakers, which by all accounts should have been dead, a sound emerged. It was not a voice. It was a digitally altered tone, an octave lower than any human could produce, devoid of emotion, a cold cascade of data points. It was a sound that made the hair on the back of every man's neck stand on end. The sound ceased, and a new voice, equally synthesized and devoid of life, filled the bridge. The words themselves were simple, yet they landed like a physical blow. USS Leighton, this is a Stratcom override. Protocol 7. You have engaged a Phantom-class asset. Authentication code Echo, Sierra, Mike, India, Sierra. The bridge fell into a deeper, more profound silence than before. Every officer, every crew member, from the most junior ensign to the most senior lieutenant, stared at the speakers as if they were a ghost. The words, the code, the sheer impossibility of the transmission were a direct violation of everything they knew about military security and encrypted communication. Dent's face had gone a shade of grey that was not natural. He turned to Kearns, his jaw working silently, the rigidity of his ambition now replaced by a fragile, crumbling confusion. "Sir, what is this?" he whispered, his voice a pathetic imitation of the clipped authority he had so proudly worn. Kearns didn't answer. His mind was a whirlwind of memories, fragments of a classified briefing he had received years ago upon taking command. A briefing that was intentionally designed to be boring, to be forgettable, to be relegated to the back of his mind as a series of improbable theoretical scenarios that would never, under any circumstances, come to pass. The name of the protocol, the authentication code, they were all there, buried deep in his subconscious, a grim and terrible truth now clawing its way to the surface. He finally spoke, his voice tight with a tension that threatened to snap. "Stand down all weapon systems," he ordered, his gaze still fixed on the speaker. "Now." "That's an order, Lieutenant Commander." His words carried a weight that was unmistakable, the weight of a man who suddenly realized he was standing on the edge of an abyss. Dent hesitated for a microsecond, a flash of stubborn defiance in his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He obeyed. His hands, which had been so quick to give the command to fire, now moved with a clumsy, horrified slowness. A new noise, subtle at first, then growing louder, cut through the tension. It was the rhythmic thumping of a helicopter approaching from the east. The communications officer, Ensign Miller, whose earlier warning had been ignored, now spoke, his voice filled with a desperate, terrified energy. "Sir, a helicopter is approaching. It's not responding to any of our requests for identification." The lack of a response, the very audacity of it, was an act of pure institutional defiance. It was a statement. What was happening was beyond the purview of the USS Leighton's command structure. Before Kearns could even process the information, a new transmission blared from the speakers, overriding the helicopter's own static. "Let it land." "That's Director Frost from Naval Intelligence." The name hung in the air, a final definitive nail in the coffin of their understanding. Director Quillen Frost was a mythical figure, a man whose face rarely appeared in any official capacity, whose name was whispered in hushed tones in the highest echelons of military power. His arrival in person was not a good sign. It was a sign of a catastrophe of unimaginable scale. The bridge fell silent again. A heavy, suffocating silence as the helicopter landed with surgical precision on the Leighton's deck. Before they could even begin to process the arrival of the head of Naval Intelligence, a new secured video transmission appeared on their main tactical display. The screen, which had been a dead grey just minutes ago, suddenly blazed to life. A woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her uniform adorned with rows of decorations, stared back at them. Her name was Admiral Celine Harrow, and her voice, when she spoke, was tight with a controlled fury that was far more terrifying than any unhinged scream. "Commander Kearns," she began, her eyes burning into him through the screen, "do you have any idea what you've done?" Kearns stood at attention, his posture instinctively rigid despite the internal chaos. "Admiral, we engaged an unresponsive civilian vessel approaching a restricted zone following standard protocol. The warning shot inadvertently struck the hull." His words were a desperate attempt to cling to the order and logic that had defined his entire career. A flimsy life raft in an ocean of institutional failure. Admiral Harrow cut him off, her voice slicing through his pathetic defense. "That's not some tourist, Commander. That's Marina Vale, and it wasn't inadvertent. My records indicate a subtle deviation from standard warning shot protocol that led to the breach. One of your officers, Lieutenant Commander Dent, deliberately pushed for escalation." The words hung in the air, a final damning verdict. Every eye on the bridge, including Kearns's, now turned to Dent. Dent's face was a study in pure, unadulterated shock. His ambition, his rigid adherence to the rulebook had just been revealed as a shallow, dangerous facade. The Admiral's rage was just beginning. "Lieutenant Commander Dent, with respect, who is Marina Vale?" he asked, the arrogance in his voice a faint memory replaced by a terrified meekness. Admiral Harrow's face hardened further. "Someone you are not cleared to know about, Lieutenant Commander. She is the very reason you exist." With a flick of a command, the main screen changed. It began to display a montage of satellite feeds and classified video footage, a torrent of information that had been sealed for decades. They watched, completely stunned, as the images flashed by. One showed a woman, unmistakably Marina Vale, extracting a dozen American hostages from an impenetrable fortress in a Middle Eastern country. Another showed her single-handedly preventing a bioterror attack in a bustling Asian metropolis. A third showed her receiving a medal from a former president in a classified ceremony. The Admiral's voice, now a chillingly precise instrument of institutional justice, continued. "Marina Vale is not just an asset, she is the architect of the Phantom program. Half the protocols your ship's systems run on, the ones that failed moments ago, were created by her. When she went private, 3 separate intelligence agencies signed agreements guaranteeing her complete autonomy. You didn't just fire on a civilian vessel, Commander. You fired on the foundation of our entire security apparatus." The weight of the Admiral's words was a physical presence, a crushing burden that settled over Kearns's shoulders. His mind, which had always prided itself on its rationality, could not process the magnitude of the mistake. He felt a deep, sickening sense of betrayal. "Admiral, there was no notification of a sanctioned operation in this region. Nothing in our daily briefings," he pleaded. his voice a hollow echo of his former authority. "Because there wasn't supposed to be," Admiral Harrow responded, her voice sharp as a razor. "That boat you fired on was gathering data on unauthorized Chinese incursions that our official Navy vessels can't approach without causing an international incident. Your command was supposed to recognize the Phantom Protocol, stand down, and allow the asset to continue its operation. 3 people in your chain of command knew about these protocols and failed to implement them. The system failed before you even made contact with her vessel. The crew, having just learned that their commanding officer had not only fired on a top-tier asset, but was also a victim of a system-wide institutional failure, began to stir, a low murmur of confused shock rippling through the bridge. Just then, a commotion drew their attention as the hatch to the bridge opened. Director Quillen Frost, a tall, lean man in a tailored dark suit, walked onto the bridge. He was the very embodiment of quiet authority, his presence more imposing than any military uniform could have been. He didn't acknowledge anyone, didn't utter a single word. He walked to the edge of the deck, his gaze fixed on Marina's vessel in the distance. He stood at attention and rendered a slow, formal salute. A salute that held for an uncomfortably long time. It was a gesture of respect, of apology, of recognition. It was a gesture that spoke volumes without a single word. Admiral Harrow's voice, though still coming through the speaker, now seemed to fade into the background, a distant echo of the reality that was now unfolding before them. Kearns, his gaze fixed on the powerful figure of Director Frost, felt his stomach drop. Dent, his face a mask of abject horror, finally found his voice, a pathetic, strangled whisper. "Sir, what happens now?" Kearns, no longer concerned with the man's petty ambitions, turned his attention back to the screen. Effective immediately, Admiral Harrow's voice cut in, cold and final. "This patrol unit is suspended. Lieutenant Commander Dent will be reassigned pending investigation. 2 admirals have already tendered their resignations for the failure in communication protocols." The words were a death sentence for Dent, the end of a career he had so desperately sought to advance. His face flushed a deep crimson, a mixture of rage and shame. "Admiral, this is completely unjust. We followed standard procedure." But his protest was futile. Admiral Harrow simply cut him off. "This is not open for discussion, Lieutenant Commander." The image on the screen blinked out. The bridge was plunged back into silence, a silence now heavy with the weight of institutional failure and ruined careers. The helicopter, which had just delivered the Director of Naval Intelligence, now began to prepare for its departure, its rotor blades a final deafening sound that symbolized the end of an era. As the crew began to disperse, their faces a mixture of confusion and pity, Kearns was left alone on the bridge. He looked out at the tranquil water of the Gulf of Sulu, at the distant, deceptively peaceful boat of Marina Vale. He knew that the system had failed him, had failed them all. But the knowledge was a cold comfort. He was a commander without a command, a man whose entire worldview had been shattered in a matter of minutes. As Director Frost, his form a silent, powerful silhouette on the Leighton's deck, prepared to depart, Kearns was left with a single unanswerable question. He had followed the rules, had trusted the protocols, and had been caught in a web of secrets far older and more complex than he could ever have imagined. He was just a man on a bridge, watching the world as he knew it crumble, all because of a single 6-word phone call. The silence that fell upon the bridge of the USS Leighton was a silence of complete and utter institutional collapse. Commander Ellis Kearns, a man whose entire professional life had been built on order and protocol, stood amidst the wreckage of his command, watching as Director Quillen Frost, a figure of almost mythical authority, departed in his unmarked helicopter. The thrumming of the rotor blades was the only sound that pierced the air, a final deafening period at the end of a devastating sentence. Frost's presence had been a declaration, a physical manifestation of a world far beyond the regulations and clearances that Kearns had so dutifully adhered to. Now the man who had been the face of that world was gone, leaving Kearns alone with the fallout. The weight of the situation was a physical presence, a crushing force that settled on Kearns's shoulders. He was a commander without a command, a captain of a ship that was now, for all intents and purposes, a floating crime scene. The crew, shaken and bewildered, had been dismissed to their quarters, their faces a mixture of confusion and pity for their captain. Dent, the man whose arrogant ambition had set this chain of events in motion, had been escorted away, his immaculate uniform a cruel mockery of his ruined career. Kearns was left alone with the ghosts of his own choices, with the echo of Admiral Harrow's furious voice, and with the dawning, terrifying understanding that he had been a pawn in a game he hadn't even known was being played. After what felt like an eternity, a junior officer tentatively approached the bridge. "Commander," the young man began, his voice hesitant, "Director Frost requested that you meet him on the flight deck." Kearns simply nodded, his mind still 1,000 miles away. He walked with a heavy, purposeful step, the weight of his command now replaced by the weight of a far greater, more terrifying responsibility. On the flight deck, the air was sharp with the scent of salt and fuel. Director Frost stood silhouetted against the brilliant morning sun, his tailored dark suit a stark contrast to the grey steel of the warship. He didn't turn as Kearns approached. He simply stared out at the shimmering expanse of the Gulf, his gaze fixed on the distant, deceptively peaceful vessel of Marina Vale. "A catastrophic failure, Commander," Frost said, his voice surprisingly soft, lacking the fury of Admiral Harrow, not of tactics, but of protocol. "The entire Pacific command structure is under review. The careers of 3 flag officers, men who should have had the foresight to prevent this, are now over. And all because of one single warning shot." Kearns felt a wave of impotent rage wash over him. He had followed the rules, had exercised caution, and had been betrayed by the very system he had sworn to uphold. "Sir, with all due respect," Kearns began, his voice hoarse, "how were we to know? The protocols, the asset, none of it was in our briefings." Frost finally turned, his eyes sharp and evaluating, boring into Kearns. He wasn't angry, he was simply assessing, measuring, calculating. "That's precisely the point, Commander. The best assets are the ones nobody knows to look for, and the protocols for them are meant to be obscure, to be buried so deep that they only surface in exceptional circumstances." Frost gestured towards the distant vessel. "You requested permission to personally apologize to Miss Vale." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a testament to the level of detail that Frost had access to. "Yes, sir," Kearns replied, the words a quiet declaration of his own integrity, his own sense of honor. Frost nodded slowly. A tactically sound officer would have been concerned with the repercussions. A truly exceptional officer is concerned with the human cost, with the integrity of the mission, and with the simple act of acknowledging an error directly. "You, Commander, are the latter." The words were not a compliment. They were a classification, a final and definitive assessment of Kearns's character. "You'll be reassigned," Frost continued, "not punished, not dishonorably discharged. You've passed a test that most officers in your position wouldn't have even been aware they were taking." The words hung in the air, a final stunning revelation. Kearns, for the first time since the warning shot, felt a strange, terrifying sense of clarity. His career wasn't over, it was just beginning. "I'll have a launch prepared," Frost said, his voice now crisp and authoritative, the mysterious myth giving way to the cold, hard logic of command. "She's still repairing her hull. I suggest you prepare what you want to say to her carefully. She is not a woman to be trifled with." Minutes later, Kearns stood on the deck of a small, nondescript launch, the low hum of its engine the only sound in the otherwise deafening silence. He was a man suspended between two worlds. Behind him, the colossal grey mass of the USS Leighton, a symbol of the rigid, by-the-book military structure he had so dutifully served. Ahead of him, the small, unassuming vessel of Marina Vale, a symbol of a far more fluid, more dangerous, and more powerful reality. He looked down at his own hands, the hands of a commander, the hands that had been on the verge of issuing a standard protocol that would have, in a different world, been the correct move. But this was not that world. This was a world of sovereign assets, of classified protocols, and of a woman who was a ghost in the machine. As the launch drew alongside the Silent Arrow, Kearns noticed the details that had been invisible from a distance. The boat's hull, so perfectly ordinary from afar, had subtle reinforced sections that didn't match any civilian design. The glass of the cabin, which should have been standard, was unusually thick, a testament to its true purpose. And on the deck, Marina Vale worked with a quiet, unnerving efficiency. Her auburn hair pulled back, her movements precise and economical. She was a woman who had faced far worse than a minor hull breach. She was an operative, not a victim. Kearns stepped onto her deck, the formal language of his career still clinging to him like an ill-fitting uniform. "Miss Vale," he began, his voice formal, "I want to formally apologize for the actions taken by my vessel and crew. The warning shot was intended to follow standard protocol, but clearly struck your vessel, which was never our intention." Marina didn't look up from her work. She was applying some kind of advanced polymer sealant to the damaged section of the hull, a substance that bonded instantly, hardening to match the surrounding structure perfectly. Her voice, when it came, was clear, precise, and devoid of any hint of accusation. "Commander," she interrupted, not looking up from her work, "I put myself in your path. This was a scheduled test of response protocols. Your tactical assessment was correct. Your intelligence briefing was not." Kearns was struck by the sheer devastating simplicity of her words. She was not angry. She was not bitter. She was simply stating a fact that had just ended careers and triggered a massive institutional collapse. "They're dismantling our entire unit because of this," he said, the frustration finally bubbling to the surface, a trace of bitterness in his voice. Marina finally looked up, her eyes sharp and evaluating, fixed on his. "They're restructuring because 3 people in your chain of command knew about Phantom protocols and failed to implement them. The system failed, not you." She set aside her repair tools and reached into a waterproof case, extracting a small, unmarked device no larger than a thumb drive. "When you're reassigned next month, and you will be reassigned, not discharged, plug this into any secure terminal. It will give you access to the real briefings you should have had." Kearns stared at the device, then back at Marina. The weight of it, the gravity of its implications, felt staggering. He had been a soldier in a war he didn't know existed, and now he was being given the keys to the kingdom. "Why me?" he asked, the question escaping his lips before he could stop it. "Why not Dent? He followed the rules even more stringently than I did." Marina offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Lieutenant Commander Dent follows rules. You," she said, her voice a low, knowing murmur, "understand why rules sometimes need to be broken. Your file indicated potential. Your actions today confirmed it." Kearns felt a sudden jolt of unease. "My file?" he asked. "You had access to my service record." Marina's smile widened slightly. "I have access to everything, Commander. That's part of the agreement." The words were a quiet, terrifying declaration of her power, a confirmation that the world he thought he knew was an illusion. Kearns watched as she secured her tools with the same unnerving efficiency, the same lack of wasted movement. He had so many questions, so many things he wanted to know about this woman, about this world. He decided on directness. "Are you military? Intelligence? A private contractor?" he asked. She simply looked at him, her eyes holding a depth of experience that made him feel like a novice despite his years of service. "Yes," she replied, the word a simple, elegant answer that encompassed everything and nothing all at once. "How many others like you are there?" he asked. "Other sovereign assets?" She paused, seeming to consider the question carefully. "Fewer than there were, more than there should be." He decided on one last question, a question that had been nagging at him since the moment the bridge went silent. "The program you designed, Phantom, what exactly is it?" Marina paused, her gaze fixed on the horizon, her mind a million miles away. "It's an intelligence architecture that operates in the negative spaces between official agencies. When the CIA can't talk to the NSA because of jurisdictional boundaries. When naval intelligence can't coordinate with foreign allies because of classification issues, Phantom creates secure bridges. I maintain those bridges." She glanced back at him, her eyes holding an unspoken challenge. "And that requires me to be mobile, independent, and outside the system I help maintain. Separation provides perspective." She nodded towards the launch, a clear sign that his time was up. "Your last question, Commander. Make it count." As Kearns turned to leave, a final nagging thought surfaced. "They call you something, a call sign." For the first time, Marina offered a genuine, though small, smile. "Nemesis," she replied, the name hanging in the air between them, a quiet declaration of her power, her purpose, and her place in the shadows. "Thank you for your time, Miss Vale," Kearns said formally, turning to leave. As he reached the edge of her boat, she called out, "Commander, remember that device I gave you? You'll know when to use it." As Kearns's launch began its journey back to the Leighton, he glanced back at the silent arrow. But the vessel was already changing. Panels shifted, lights activated along concealed seams, and what had appeared to be ordinary sections of the hull reconfigured themselves. The entire vessel smoothly slipped beneath the waves, leaving barely a ripple. By the time he reached the Leighton and looked back, the sea was empty. It was as though Marina Vale had never been there at all. Kearns stood on the deck of his warship, the unmarked device in his pocket, a man who had just been given a glimpse of a world operating in the shadows of official channels, a world of sovereign assets and classified protocols, of operations that never appear in any briefing. His career wasn't over, it had just been transformed, and for the first time in his life he was excited and terrified by what came next. 3 months had passed since Commander Ellis Kearns had stood on the bridge of the USS Leighton, a man watching his world crumble. The salt-laced air of the Gulf of Sulu was a distant memory, replaced by the sterile, soundproofed environment of Naval Intelligence Headquarters. His new office was a study in functional minimalism, a secure desk, 3 computer terminals, and walls swept for listening devices twice daily. The windows, though they offered a view of the capital, felt more like a barrier, separating him from the messy, chaotic reality of the world he had once so confidently commanded. His transition from ship captain to intelligence analyst hadn't been an easy one, but he had adapted. His mind, once so focused on tactical command and rigid protocols, now learning to navigate the labyrinthine corridors of classified information. He had plugged in the device Marina Vale had given him, and as promised, it had unlocked a series of briefings, of operational parameters and recognition codes that would have prevented the entire incident on the Leighton. He had immersed himself in the information, a silent student in a school he never knew existed, learning about the Phantom program, about sovereign assets, about a world that operated in the negative spaces between official agencies. He had become a ghost in the machine, a man who pushed papers and attended briefings, but whose true purpose was not yet known, not even to himself. The hum of the secure computer terminals, the soft glow of the data streams, the quiet, almost reverent atmosphere of his new workplace. It was a far cry from the rhythmic crash of waves against a hull. He had been a man of action. Now he was a man of information. The change was a constant, unsettling presence in his mind. He was good at his new job, his experience as a commander giving him a unique perspective on the files he reviewed, but a part of him, a deeper, more primal part, yearned for the open sea, for the clarity of a direct order and the visceral reality of a mission. The call came not through a blinking light or a ringing phone, but through a silent, encrypted message that appeared on his main terminal. Commander Kearns, Conference Room 4, Stratcom override. Immediate. The message was a ghost from his past, a digital echo of the very same protocols that had ended his career and opened his new one. He didn't hesitate. He stood, his movements precise and economical, and walked down a corridor accessible only to those with the highest security clearances. The conference room was a marvel of technology, a silent, dark space where holographic maps and data streams hung in the air like constellations. Director Quillen Frost stood at the head of the table, his posture perfect, his expression unreadable. Several other intelligence officials, their faces a mixture of intensity and quiet concern, were already gathered. Frost began without preamble, his voice a low, precise instrument of authority. 12 hours ago, we lost contact with one of our sovereign assets operating in Malaysian waters. Asset code name Orchid was tracking a ship suspected of carrying advanced weapons systems to a non-state actor. Her vessel's emergency beacon activated briefly, then went dark. A three-dimensional holographic map of the Malaysian coastline appeared in the center of the table, a stark digital representation of a crisis unfolding in real time. An intelligence analyst stepped forward, his voice clinical and detached. Latest satellite imagery shows increased patrol boat activity from the Malaysian Navy in the region. They may have intercepted our asset. The room fell silent, a palpable tension settling over the officials. Intercepting a phantom asset was a catastrophe. Capturing one was an international incident waiting to happen. Frost's expression hardened. If they've captured a sovereign asset, the protocols are clear. We need to extract immediately before they realize what they have. The stakes were astronomical. A captured phantom asset wasn't just a person, it was a library of classified information, a repository of protocols and secrets that could compromise an entire network of global intelligence. "Sir," Ellis ventured, his voice cutting through the silence, "have we considered requesting assistance from Nemesis? Her operational area overlaps with this region." The room fell into a deeper, more profound silence. Several of the officials exchanged glances, a mixture of disbelief and apprehension on their faces. The very name Nemesis was a ghost story, a myth whispered in the highest echelons of power. Frost regarded Ellis with a long, measuring look, a hint of something that might have been approval in his eyes. "That's why you're here, Commander. Nemesis has already made contact. She's requesting you specifically for a joint operation." Ellis felt a jolt of surprise, a strange mixture of apprehension and a primal sense of anticipation. He, a paper pusher, a former ship captain, was being requested by a ghost, by a living legend. "Me? Why?" he asked, the words escaping his lips before he could stop them. Frost simply slid a secure tablet across the table. "She believes you've seen her operate up close. That gives you an advantage most intelligence officers lack. These are your orders. You will rendezvous with her vessel at these coordinates in 6 hours. From that point, you'll be operating under her tactical command." The orders were clear, concise, and terrifyingly open-ended. Assist Nemesis in extracting sovereign asset Orchid and any associated intelligence materials. Use of force authorized as necessary. No official acknowledgement of U.S. involvement if compromised. Ellis absorbed the information, his mind, once so focused on the precise black-and-white world of naval command, now learning to navigate the grey, chaotic world of deniable operations. "Sir, what's my cover if things go wrong?" he asked, a professional question born of a lifetime of military experience. Frost's expression was grim. "You're on leave, personal vacation. If captured, you're a private security consultant who made very poor choices about where to sail." The words, spoken with a chilling finality, made it clear that this wasn't a joke. Extraction would be on standby, but they wouldn't enter sovereign waters unless absolutely necessary. He was, in all senses of the word, on his own. 6 hours later, Ellis found himself aboard a high-speed transport heading across the Malaysian waters. The night was moonless, perfect for covert operations, but his mind was a whirlwind of memories and protocols, of the rigid, structured world he had left behind and the fluid, dangerous world he was about to enter. As they approached the rendezvous coordinates, the pilot reduced speed. "Commander, we're 5 minutes out. No visual on the target vessel." Ellis wasn't surprised. "She'll find us. Maintain position and wait." And sure enough, right on schedule, running lights appeared off the port side, emerging from the darkness as if the vessel had materialized from the very sea itself. The Silent Arrow looked different from their last encounter. Its hull, once a deceptively innocent white, was now a matte black that absorbed rather than reflected light. Its profile was lower, more predatory, a silent hunter rather than a tranquil drifter. As they drew alongside, Ellis saw Marina Vale waiting on deck. She wasn't wearing the simple, salt-streaked clothes of a civilian sailor. She was in tactical gear now, a functional, darkened uniform bristling with equipment that spoke to the nature of their mission. Her movements were precise, her posture a study in controlled readiness. "Permission to come aboard," Ellis called softly. The formal language of his past, a small, comforting anchor in this sea of uncertainty. "Granted," she responded, her voice carrying easily across the water despite its low volume. Once aboard, Ellis dismissed his transport with a predetermined signal. The craft disappeared back toward friendly waters, leaving him alone with Nemesis. "Commander," she greeted him formally, her eyes, sharp and evaluating, fixed on his. "Welcome to the Silent Arrow. Miss Vale," he responded in kind. "I understand we have an extraction to perform." She led him below deck, and the civilian facade of the vessel fell away completely. The interior was a marvel of advanced technology. Screens displayed satellite imagery, thermal scans, and communications intercepts. A weapons locker, its contents a collection of highly specialized, silenced firearms and breaching tools, stood open and ready. Orchid was compromised while tracking a weapons shipment, Marina explained, bringing up a detailed map. Her last transmission indicated she had confirmed intelligence about next-generation anti-ship missiles being delivered to insurgent forces. The Malaysian Navy intercepted her before she could transmit the full intelligence package. Ellis studied the tactical display, the grim reality of the situation a heavy weight in his mind. "They know what they have?" he asked. "Not yet," Marina replied. "Her cover identity is solid. Environmental researcher documenting coral reef degradation. But that won't hold if they access her vessel's hidden compartments or if certain international actors identify her." Her gaze met his, a silent understanding passing between them. "Certain actors, meaning Chinese intelligence," he said, the words a quiet confirmation of a truth they both knew. Marina's expression was grim. "The Chinese have a military advisory team stationed with Malaysia's naval forces. If they get involved in the interrogation, Orchid's cover will be compromised within hours." Ellis took a deep breath, his mind already shifting from passive analysis to active strategy. "So, what's the plan?" We insert quietly, extract our asset, and leave without escalation? He asked, a question that was part tactical assessment, part professional curiosity. Marina's lips, for the briefest of moments, curled into a faint smile. My thoughts exactly, Commander. But a simple extraction is not enough. She tapped a command on her console, and the map changed, displaying detailed schematics of a coastal naval facility. This entire operation, she said, her voice a low, precise murmur, was not a failure. It was a test. A test to uncover links between foreign military advisors and local insurgents. Ellis stared at her, the pieces of the puzzle he had been given months ago now clicking into place. You're saying Orchid was intentionally captured? He asked, the words a testament to the sheer, audacious genius of the Phantom program. Marina nodded. Exactly. We needed to confirm which Chinese military officers were embedded with the Malaysian Navy. Orchid's capture created an opportunity to map their response patterns and identify key personnel. Her extraction by us forces them to reveal additional security protocols. Ellis absorbed the information, a wave of profound respect for this woman washing over him. She wasn't just a tactician, she was a grandmaster, playing a game on a board no one else could even see. And my participation? He asked, the question a quiet, almost reverent acknowledgement of his own new place in this world. Marina's gaze, sharp and evaluating, met his. Your participation serves multiple purposes. It demonstrates to Director Frost that you can operate effectively in sovereign asset scenarios. It provides you with field experience in extraction operations. And it allows me to evaluate your potential for future collaboration. The words were a confirmation of everything he had just learned, a final, definitive classification of his new role. He was no longer a commander, he was an asset, and his mission, his true mission, was just about to begin. The coastal compound was a study in subtle contradictions. From a distance, it appeared to be a standard-issue military facility, a high concrete wall, a single main gate, and the usual array of watchtowers. But up close, the details told a different story. The guards at the checkpoint, though armed, carried themselves with a certain laxity, a kind of weary professionalism that spoke of long, uneventful shifts. Their uniforms, while clean, were not as pristine as those of the men on the USS Leighton. This was a post dedicated to routine, to the quiet enforcement of territorial boundaries, not to the high-stakes world of international espionage. Marina Vale, disguised as a lead researcher from a fictional international marine conservancy, handled the initial interaction with a practiced ease. Her Burmese, a language Ellis Kearns had no idea she spoke, was flawless, a flowing river of polite requests and professional jargon. Ellis, playing the role of her American colleague, said little, his job simply to observe, to project an air of quiet authority and to let Marina take the lead. The credentials they presented, thick with official-looking seals and watermarks, were a masterpiece of forgery. They were not just a simple fake ID, they were a complete and utter fabrication of a plausible reality, a deep-cover narrative so thorough that no amount of cursory checking would have revealed the lie. As they were escorted through the administrative areas, Ellis noted the subtle cues that Marina had no doubt been looking for. The junior officer who was their escort was eager, almost pathetically so, to demonstrate compliance with international protocols. He was a man who wanted to be seen as a professional, a part of a legitimate military structure. He was not a man who was equipped to deal with a ghost, a nemesis, a phantom. He was a man playing a role, and Marina Vale was the director of his entire scene. The detention facility was as Spartan as they had expected, but not inhumane. The cells were simple concrete boxes with metal cots, but they were clean, and the air was not thick with the stench of despair. This too was a detail that fit the narrative. They were treating the detainee, Orchid, not as a spy or a prisoner of war, but as a simple territorial violator, an environmental researcher who had strayed too far. It was a perfect piece of psychological manipulation, a narrative so believable that it had completely fooled the men on the ground. When their escort left them in an administrative office to consult with his superiors, the civilian facade of the mission was dropped with a chilling swiftness. The moment the door closed, Marina moved to the computer terminal, her movements precise and economical. "What are you doing?" Ellis whispered, his voice a low, tense murmur. Marina's fingers flew across the keyboard, creating our distraction. Erasing security logs simultaneously. We have approximately 7 minutes before someone notices the system intrusion. Her words were a final, definitive declaration of the stakes. The clock was ticking. When their escort returned with the approval to interview the prisoner, he led them to the detention block. They found Orchid in her cell, a small, wiry woman with closely cropped hair and the wary eyes of someone who had seen too much of the world. She sat on her cot, her posture still that of an environmental researcher, her face devoid of any emotion that would give away her true identity. She showed no recognition when they entered, maintaining her cover even now. "Ms. Whitman," Marina addressed her, using her cover name. "We're here from the International Maritime Conservancy to discuss your research activities in protected waters." Orchid played along perfectly, launching into a detailed and technically accurate explanation of coral reef monitoring protocols. When their escort stepped outside, her demeanor changed instantly. Her eyes, which had been so placid, now burned with an intense, focused energy. "Extraction?" she asked quietly, her voice a low murmur that was almost lost in the silent tension of the room. "In progress," Marina confirmed. "Intelligence package compromised?" Orchid shook her head. "Had to scuttle the vessel with the hard evidence on board, but I memorized the key details. Shipping manifests, serial numbers, contact protocols. Chinese military involvement confirmed." Marina nodded, her expression grim. "Ellis, prepare for our exit. 3 minutes." Right on cue, a sudden jarring alarm began to blare throughout the compound. Emergency lights flashed, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. A computerized voice, speaking not in Burmese but in Chinese, began to announce a security protocol violation. The distraction was a masterpiece. Marina had not simply caused a fire alarm, she had created a diversion that would force the local authorities to focus on what appeared to be a Chinese military system override, a direct challenge to their sovereignty. In the ensuing chaos, they were able to exit the compound with a terrifying, almost surreal ease. Guards rushed past them toward the administrative buildings, their faces a mixture of confusion and panic, paying little attention to 3 civilians walking purposefully in the opposite direction. At the service entrance, a nondescript truck waited with a local driver who acknowledged Marina with nothing more than a nod. They climbed into the back, concealed by cargo tarps, and began the journey back toward the coast. The ride was silent, the only sound the low rumble of the truck's engine and the distant fading blare of the alarms. Once they were safely underway, Ellis, whose heart was still pounding from the adrenaline of the extraction, finally spoke. "Smooth extraction," he commented, the words a quiet acknowledgement of Marina's genius. "Almost too smooth." Marina gave him an appraising look, a flicker of something that might have been approval in her eyes. "You notice that, Commander? The level of access, the perfect timing of the distraction, the convenient absence of senior officers." Her words were a test, a final, definitive examination of his abilities. "This was coordinated from within," Ellis replied, the pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. "Very good, Commander. We have assets in many places. Some know they are assets. Others simply receive unexpected promotions or transfers when they make decisions that benefit our operations." The words were a quiet, terrifying declaration of the sheer scale of the Phantom network. Orchid, who had been listening to their exchange, spoke up from beneath her blanket. "The intelligence is solid. Chinese next-generation anti-ship missiles with modified targeting systems designed to defeat U.S. carrier group defenses. They're using Malaysian insurgents as cover for field testing." The stakes, which had already been high, were now astronomical. "That's worth the extraction risk," Ellis acknowledged, the words a professional assessment of the mission's value. "But how did you get compromised, Orchid?" he asked, a question that now held a new, deeper meaning. Orchid simply looked at him, a faint, almost imperceptible smile on her lips. "I didn't, Commander. My capture was deliberate. We needed to confirm which Chinese military officers were embedded with the Malaysian Navy. Now we have faces, names, and operational patterns." Ellis stared at her, then back at Marina. The full, unvarnished truth of the situation was a physical blow, a complete and total subversion of his entire understanding of the mission. "This entire operation," he said, his voice a low, strangled murmur, "was theater." "Not exactly," Marina clarified, her voice a calm, precise instrument of institutional power. "We needed specific intelligence that couldn't be gathered remotely. Orchid's capture created an opportunity to map their response patterns and identify key personnel. Her extraction by us forces them to reveal additional security protocols." She paused, her eyes meeting Alice's. "And your participation served multiple purposes, Commander. It demonstrates to Director Frost that you can operate effectively in sovereign asset scenarios. It provides you with field experience in extraction operations, and it allows me to evaluate your potential for future collaboration." The words were a final, definitive confirmation of the game he had just played. He had not been a rescuer. He had not been a hero. He had been a participant in a performance, a final test in a series of evaluations that had begun the moment the warning shot had struck the silent arrow. He was, in all senses of the word, a pawn in a larger, more intricate game. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. He had passed the test, had proven his worth, but he had done so by participating in a deception of unimaginable scale. The world he had once known, a world of black and white rules and clear-cut missions, was gone, replaced by a world of shadows, of lies, and of sovereign assets who bent the rules to their will. The part was over, but the game was just beginning. The low rumble of the truck's engine was a comforting drone, a steady heartbeat of their escape as they rumbled toward the coast. The pre-dawn light was just beginning to paint the sky, casting a soft, ethereal glow on the horizon, a visual paradox to the high-stakes, adrenaline-fueled chaos they had just left behind. Ellis Kearns, his senses still buzzing with the aftershocks of the infiltration, sat in the back of the truck, the rough canvas tarp a starkly real contrast to the polished steel and holographic displays of his former life. Orchid, the other Phantom asset, sat beside him, a small, quiet presence whose stillness was a testament to her profound skill. Her cover identity had been shed, and now she was simply an operative, a woman who had willingly walked into a cage to secure a piece of intelligence that could change the geopolitical landscape. The fishing vessel, a small, unremarkable craft, was their final leg of the journey, a necessary, mundane step in a mission that was anything but. The reunion with the Silent Arrow was a quiet, profound moment. The vessel, which had been piloted remotely to their extraction point, was a beacon of safety, a silent, dark fortress waiting for their return. As they climbed aboard, the civilian facade that had been so carefully constructed months ago was completely gone. The interior was a marvel of advanced technology, a sterile, functional space bristling with consoles, screens, and the kind of equipment that wouldn't look out of place in a special operations command center. Orchid moved with purpose. a ghost in her own right, and within minutes she was transferring the intelligence she had memorized to Marina's secure systems. The shipping manifests, the serial numbers of the missiles, the names of the Chinese military advisors, all of it was being digitized, sanitized, and prepared for a slow, methodical introduction into conventional intelligence channels. The information was a goldmine, a strategic victory that would never be acknowledged, never be celebrated, but would, in the quiet corridors of power, be considered a masterpiece. Orchid finished her task and simply nodded at Marina, her eyes holding a look of mutual respect and understanding. She was a professional, a woman who had performed her duty with a chilling efficiency, and now her part in the performance was over. She retired to rest, her face a mask of quiet exhaustion, leaving Ellis alone with Nemesis on the bridge of the Silent Arrow. The silence that fell between them was not awkward. It was a silence of profound understanding, of two people who had just shared an experience that would forever bind them to a world that most could never even imagine. Marina moved with the same unnerving calm, her hands gliding over the controls, her gaze fixed on the horizon as she set a course for international waters. Ellis watched her, a million questions burning in his mind, but he knew the time for questions was over. This was a moment for quiet observation, for absorbing the final, definitive truths of this new world. Marina, for her part, seemed to sense the weight of his thoughts. Without looking at him, she spoke, her voice a low, precise murmur that was the final piece of his evaluation. "Your performance exceeded expectations, Commander," she said, the words a quiet confirmation of his new purpose. "Thank you, I think," Ellis replied, a ghost of a smile on his face. The phrase was a small human crack in the otherwise impenetrable professional facade they had both built. The conversation that followed was not a dialogue. It was a final, definitive briefing. Marina spoke of the Phantom program not as a series of protocols, but as a philosophy. "The device I gave you months ago," she said, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon. "Have you used it beyond accessing the briefings?" Ellis shook his head. "No, I haven't felt ready." Marina nodded slowly, a look of understanding on her face. "When you are ready, it contains additional access protocols, secure communication channels that bypass official networks. There may be situations where your position within the system and my position outside it create useful synergies." The words were a quiet, terrifying offer. She wasn't just giving him a job. She was giving him a bridge, a direct, off-grid link to a world that was beyond command, beyond control. He looked at her, at the woman who had, in the space of 3 months, dismantled his career, rebuilt his identity, and given him a new purpose. He looked at the woman who had designed a world of shadows, of ghosts, and of sovereign assets. "How many of you are there?" he asked, a question he had asked before, but one that now held a new, deeper meaning. Marina paused, considering her words carefully. Fewer than there were. The program reached its peak during the early war on terror. Too many agencies creating deniable assets without coordination. Some went rogue, others burned out. Now we're more selective. Her gaze met his, a silent confirmation that he was now one of the chosen, one of the few. "And the Phantom Division?" he asked, the words a quiet acknowledgement of his new, terrifying reality. "It supports assets like us without controlling us. It maintains the boundaries between official and unofficial operations," she explained. "You've been identified as someone who understands those boundaries, someone who can work within the system while recognizing its limitations." The words were a final, definitive classification of his character, his purpose, and his new life. She then made a final, powerful declaration. "The device I gave you, Commander, it's a key. The briefings are the antechamber, the full access. That's the door. You'll know when to open it." As they reached international waters, Marina engaged the vessel's advanced propulsion system. The silent arrow accelerated smoothly, leaving minimal wake despite its speed, a silent, graceful hunter gliding across the sea. A transport vessel appeared on the horizon, a symbol of the official world returning to claim him. As the transport arrived, Ellis prepared to leave, a man forever changed. He turned to Marina, a final question hanging on his lips. "They called you something," he said, his voice a low, reverent murmur, a call sign. For the first time since their brief, chaotic encounter, Marina offered a genuine smile, a flash of warmth that transformed her face, making her look not like a ghost, but like a human being. "Nemesis," she replied, the name a final, powerful declaration of her purpose. Ellis returned to his official duties, a ghost in the machine, a man who pushed papers and attended briefings, but whose mind was 1,000 miles away on a boat that no longer existed. He received his sealed orders, a cryptic message with a set of coordinates and a date 2 weeks in the future. At the bottom, a simple message: the Phantom Division welcomes qualified candidates. That evening, in his soundproofed, biometrically secured office, Ellis looked out at the city lights, the man-made constellations a stark contrast to the vast, untamed ocean he had just left. He took the device Marina had given him, a small, sleek black object, and for the first time since their final conversation, he felt a strange, primal pull to open the door, to cross the bridge. He inserted the device into his secure terminal, and, as promised, a deeper layer of access unfolded before him. Not just briefings, but a universe of unlogged missions, of off-grid communication channels, and of directives that didn't officially exist. He saw a world of strategic deceptions, of quiet operations, of a network of sovereign assets who moved in the shadows, protecting a system that was too rigid, too bureaucratic to protect itself. He saw the truth, the raw, unfiltered reality of what it meant to be a phantom. The emotional beat was a deep, profound understanding, a quiet realization that the rules he had so dutifully followed were nothing more than a front for a far more complex, far more dangerous game. The story ends with Ellis looking out at the ocean, a man who had gone from commanding a warship to being a bridge between two worlds. He knew his next mission wouldn't be logged in any system, and neither would Marina's. He was a man of two realities, a man who moved in the light, but whose true purpose was to serve in the shadow. He was a phantom. He was a nemesis to those who would threaten the system, and his journey, a journey that had started with a single reckless shot, had just begun. The device in his pocket was not just a key, it was a promise of a future filled with shadows, with ghosts, and with a quiet, beautiful woman who was, in all senses of the word, a force of nature. He was ready, and so, as the digital ghost of Nemesis vanishes into the silent depths of the sea, the story leaves us not with a sense of closure, but with a profound and unsettling beginning. Commander Ellis Kearns, the man who once trusted in the black and white certainties of naval protocol, is now a man living in the grey. He has been given a key not just to a network of secrets, but to a new reality, one where the rules are not written in a book but are forged in the quiet, methodical will of a handful of individuals. His journey is a powerful reminder that the world is never as simple as it appears, that beneath the placid surface of routine and order, there exists a profound and chaotic undercurrent. The story we have just witnessed is a testament to the fact that power does not always reside in the largest warships, the most decorated uniforms, or the most public pronouncements. It exists in the shadows, in the hands of those who are willing to operate without recognition, without commendation, and without the safety net of official channels. Marina Vale, Nemesis, is the living embodiment of that power. She is an enigma, a strategic mastermind who designed the very protocols meant to catch her. She is a woman who sees the world not through the lens of a mission, but through the intricate dance of cause and effect. She doesn't just respond to threats, she probes for weaknesses. She doesn't just execute plans, she tests the very systems designed to prevent them. Her actions, so cold and calculated, are not those of a hero, but those of a force of nature, an unstoppable, unfeeling agent of change. What does it truly mean to be a phantom? It is to be a shadow in a world of light. It is to accept the burden of a truth that no one else can know. It is to walk a path of extreme moral ambiguity, to be a protector and a manipulator, a hero and a villain all at once. For Ellis Kearns, this is the terrifying and exhilarating reality he now faces. He is no longer a commander who sees the world as a series of tactical decisions. He is now a guardian of the negative space, a bridge between two worlds. The device she gave him is not just a tool, it is a promise of a life filled with silent, desperate missions, of collaborations that will never be logged, and of victories that will never be celebrated. He is a man who must now learn to trust in the unseen, to find clarity in the chaos, and to find purpose in a world that operates on a different set of rules. This narrative, this exploration of a world within our world, forces us to question the very nature of authority, of trust, and of patriotism itself. Is it more patriotic to follow the rules, even when they lead to a catastrophic failure, or is it more patriotic to break them, to bend them to the will of a higher purpose? The story of Ellis Kearns and Marina Vale is an eternal question, a philosophical debate played out in a high-stakes arena of warships and covert operations. The line between right and wrong, between good and evil, is not a solid one, it is a fluid, ever-changing boundary, a line that can only be defined by the actions of those who dare to walk it. The most profound and resonant aspect of this entire tale lies not in the technological marvels or the adrenaline-fueled escapes, but in the quiet, human moments of choice. The choice of a young officer to speak up, even when it was too late. The choice of a commander to request to apologize, to acknowledge a mistake, even when his own career was on the line. The choice of a phantom, of a ghost, to extend a hand of trust to an outsider, to give him a key and a choice. These are the moments that define us, that shape our destinies, and that ultimately determine the course of our lives. Ellis Kearns' journey is not just a story of a man who was recruited into a secret program. It is a story of a man who chose to be a part of something larger, something more profound, something more meaningful than the rules he was sworn to uphold. He chose to become a part of the shadows. He chose to become a nemesis. And in doing so, he found a purpose that he never knew he was looking for. The device in his pocket is not just a symbol of a new life. It is a promise of a life filled with purpose, with meaning, and with a quiet, powerful understanding of the world as it truly is. His story is a testament to the power of a single choice, a single moment that can change everything. It is a story of a man who went from being a pawn in a game to being a player in a world he never knew existed. And as he looks out at the horizon, a man forever changed, a man with a new purpose and a new identity, we are left to wonder about the silent, unseen battles that are being fought every single day in the shadows by the ghosts. And so, as we leave Commander Kearns to his new reality, we want to thank you, our incredible audience, for joining us on this journey. This has been a tale of strategy, of intrigue, and of the hidden heroes who operate in the shadows. Brought to you by the Veteran Biker channel. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. What do you think about Marina Vale's methods? Do you believe Commander Kearns made the right choice by joining the Phantom Division? Let us know your opinions in the comments section below. We read every single one of your comments and value your input. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of high-stakes intrigue and the hidden corners of our world, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us and allows us to keep bringing you these incredible stories. We have a whole library of other thrilling content waiting for you. You can check them out right here on your screen. Until next time, stay safe out there, and thank you again for watching.